The crack of leather against wood splintered the morning air as Nora Calloway ducked, her father's belt missing her shoulder by inches. At 18, she'd endured his drunken rages for as long as she could remember, but something in his bloodshot eyes told her this time was different. This time she might not survive. Wyoming Territory, 1878. The small town of Whispering Pines clung to the edge of civilization like a burr on a saddle blanket. Nora's father, Ezekiel Calloway, had dragged their family west after her mother died of consumption 5 years earlier. The promise of free land under the Homestead Act had lured him like the whiskey that now controlled his every waking moment. "You worthless girl," he slurred, swinging the belt again. "Just like your mother, think you're too good for honest work." Nora dodged again, her long brown hair flying around her face. The irony of his words stung worse than the belt would have. Her calloused hands and aching back told the true story. She'd been working the failing farm alone for months while he drank away what little money they had at Fletcher's saloon. "I've done nothing but work, Pa," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "I'm just asking for enough money to buy seed for spring planting." His face contorted with rage. "Asking? You're demanding, girl, just like her, always demanding." When he lunged forward, Nora made her decision in an instant. She would not become another ghost in this house. She darted past him, his fingers grazing her sleeve as she slipped by. Grabbing her mother's small silver locket from the shelf, the only memento she ran through the door into the crisp autumn morning. Behind her, her father's curses faded as she ran toward town. She had no plan beyond escape, but the weight of her decision grew lighter with each step away from the farmhouse. Freedom tasted like the mountain air, sharp, clean, and terrifying. Whispering Pines appeared ahead, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road. Nora slowed to catch her breath, suddenly aware of her appearance. Her simple cotton dress was stained with work, her hair tangled from sleep and the chase. She had no money, no possessions save the locket around her neck, and nowhere to go. The general store's bell jingled as she entered, drawing the curious gaze of Mrs. Hollister, the shopkeeper's wife. "Nora Calloway, you look like you've seen the devil himself," the older woman said, putting down her knitting. "I need work, Mrs. Hollister," Nora said, straightening her spine. "Any work at all?" The woman's kind eyes clouded with pity. "Oh, child, we barely have enough to keep ourselves afloat, with the railroad bypassing us for Cheyenne." She shook her head. "Have you tried the hotel? Mr. Porter sometimes needs help with laundry." An hour later, Nora stood with burning eyes outside the hotel, the last place in town that might have offered work. No one was hiring. The sun was beginning its descent, and she couldn't return home. Her father would be even more dangerous after an afternoon of drinking. The clip-clop of hooves made her turn. A small cattle drive was coming into town, a dozen dusty men on horseback guiding a modest herd toward the stock pens at the edge of town. Cowboys, rough men with rough lives, her father had always warned, stay away from their kind. Yet as she watched them, Nora saw something. Her father had missed a code of behavior, a hierarchy, a system that somehow worked despite the hardships of the trail. The lead rider, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a weather-beaten hat, gave quiet orders that were immediately obeyed. He dismounted with fluid grace in front of the hotel, removing his hat to reveal tousled dark hair. When he looked up, his eyes met Nora's, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "Miss," he said with a nod, his voice deep but gentle. "Sir," she replied, clutching her mother's locket. He might have continued on his way, might never have spoken another word to her if fate hadn't intervened. As he turned toward the hotel entrance, a commotion erupted from down the street. "There you are, you ungrateful wench." Nora's blood froze. Her father was stumbling down the street, belt still in hand, face purple with rage and liquor. The cowboy's expression changed in an instant, reading the situation with the same quick instinct that likely served him well on the trail. He stepped between Nora and the approaching threat. "Sir," he said evenly to Ezekiel, "I believe you're causing a disturbance." "Mind your business, cowpoke," Ezekiel snarled. "That's my daughter and she's coming home." Nora found her voice. "No, Pa, I'm not." The cowboy didn't move, didn't flinch as Ezekiel came closer. The lady's made her choice. "Lady," Ezekiel laughed bitterly. "She's no lady, just a stubborn girl who needs to learn her place." When Ezekiel raised his belt, the cowboy moved with surprising speed. He caught the older man's wrist in midair, his grip clearly painful from the way Ezekiel winced. "That's no way to treat anyone, let alone your daughter," the cowboy said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. What happened next was a blur. Ezekiel threw a wild punch with his free hand. The cowboy sidestepped it easily, released Ezekiel's wrist, and watched as the drunken man's momentum carried him stumbling to the ground. "You'll regret this," Ezekiel slurred, struggling to his feet. "Both of you." He staggered away, cursing, as a small crowd of townspeople who had witnessed the confrontation began to disperse. The cowboy turned to Nora, concern evident in his eyes she now saw were a deep blue, like the sky after a storm. "Are you all right, miss?" "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled. "Thank you, Mr. Yates," he said. "Jackson Yates, Nora Calloway." He nodded, then glanced at the setting sun. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight, Miss Calloway?" The reality of her situation crashed down on her again. "No." Jackson Yates considered this, then said, "My crew is camping just outside town. We have an extra wagon. It's not much, but you'd be safe. My cook, Old Joe, is a proper gentleman despite his years on the trail, and he could use help with the meals. Paid help." Nora hesitated. Going with strange men was exactly what proper young women were warned against. But returning to her father was impossible, and the town had offered no refuge. "I can work," she said finally. "I'm not afraid of hard labor." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "I can see that, Miss Calloway, and I promise you'll be treated with respect. Anyone who doesn't will answer to me." That night, Nora slept in a covered wagon on the outskirts of town. Old Joe, a wiry man with a silver beard and kind eyes, had given her his pallet while he slept under the stars. "Been sleeping under God's ceiling for 40 years, he'd said. "Too old to change now." The bedroll smelled of coffee and wood smoke, strangely comforting scents that reminded her of campfires from happier days when her mother was alive. Through the canvas, she could hear the low murmur of men's voices around the fire, the occasional laugh, the soft nickering of horses. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear. Morning came with the aroma of coffee and bacon. Nora emerged from the wagon to find the camp already bustling with activity. Cowboys saddled horses, checked equipment, and wolfed down breakfast with the efficiency of men accustomed to long days in the saddle. Old Joe handed her a tin plate heaped with food. "Eat up, Miss Nora. Trail food ain't fancy, but it sticks to your ribs." Jackson Yates approached as she finished her meal. In the clear light of morning, she saw him better a man of perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. His clothes were worn but clean, his manner respectful but not overly formal. "Miss Calloway," he said, "we're moving the herd to the Broken Spoke Ranch about 3 days' ride from here. You're welcome to travel with us. I spoke with Mr. Porter at the hotel. Your father made quite a scene there last night. It might be best if you weren't in town for a while." Nora's stomach tightened. "What did he do?" "Nothing that can't be mended," Jackson said diplomatically, "but he's made threats. The sheriff suggested he cool off in the jail, but he'll be released by noon. 3 days seemed both too long and not long enough. And after we reach the ranch, what then?" Jackson removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "The ranch owner, Mr. Sullivan, is a fair man. He might have worked for you. If not, I'll ensure you reach a larger town safely where you could find more opportunities." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than anything she could devise on her own. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. I accept your offer." He nodded, replaced his hat, and went to give orders to his men. Old Joe chuckled beside her. That boy's taken a shine to you. Nora felt her cheeks warm. He's just being kind. Jack Yates doesn't extend himself for just anyone, the old cook said, gathering the breakfast dishes. Known him 5 years, and I've never seen him intervene in a family matter before. He's a private man with his own troubles, keeps to himself mostly. What troubles? Nora asked before she could stop herself. Old Joe shrugged. Not my story to tell. But I will say this: you could do worse than Jack Yates taking an interest in you. Much worse. Within the hour, the camp was packed, the cattle moving, and Nora found herself riding in the supply wagon with Old Joe. He taught her about camp cooking while they traveled, how to make biscuits in a Dutch oven, how to gauge the heat of coals, how to make coffee strong enough to put hair on your chest, begging your pardon, miss. Nora absorbed it all eagerly. She'd always been a quick learner, and there was something deeply satisfying about creating meals that the men fell upon like wolves after a long day's ride. She saw little of Jackson during the day. He was always at the front of the herd or riding the flank, ensuring no cattle strayed. But each evening, as the men gathered around the fire after supper, he would take a seat nearby and listen as Old Joe spun tales of his years on the frontier. On the second night, as the other cowboys drifted off to their bedrolls, Jackson remained by the fire. Nora, finishing the washing up, felt his eyes on her. "May I speak with you, Miss Calloway?" he asked when she approached. "Of course, Mr. Yates." He gestured to the log beside him, and she sat, careful to maintain a proper distance. The fire popped and hissed between them. "I want to apologize for bringing you into an uncertain situation," he said. "It wasn't my intention to place you in another difficult position after you'd escaped one." "You've been nothing but kind," Nora said. "I'm grateful." He shook his head. "Kindness doesn't always equate to wisdom." "You know very little about me or these men." "I know enough," she replied. "You stopped my father when no one in town would. You've offered me honest work and safe passage. Your men have been respectful, even the younger ones who clearly haven't had much experience with women." This drew a small smile from him. Old Joe threatened to poison anyone who stepped out of line. And would he? No, Jackson admitted, but his coffee might make them wish he had. They shared a laugh, and something shifted between them, a wall lowered, if only slightly. "May I ask you something, Mr. Yates?" "Jack," he said. "And yes, why did you help me?" Truly, the fire reflected in his eyes as he stared into it. "I recognize a soul at the breaking point," he said finally. "I've been there myself." He didn't elaborate, and Nora didn't press. They sat in companionable silence until the fire burned low, and then bid each other good night with new understanding between them. The third day dawned gray and threatening. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the cattle grew restless, sensing the change in pressure. "We need to make the ranch before that hits," Jack told the men at breakfast. "Push them a little harder today." By mid-afternoon, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain. The herd moved faster, eager to reach shelter. Nora helped Old Joe secure everything in the wagon as they rumbled along. "Going to be a gully washer," the old cook predicted. "Wyoming storms don't mess around." They were perhaps an hour from the ranch when the first fat drops began to fall. Within minutes, it had become a downpour. Lightning split the sky, and thunder boomed directly overhead. The cattle, already nervous, began to bunch together. "They're getting spooked," Old Joe shouted over the deluge. If lightning strikes too close, his words were cut off by a blinding flash and an immediate crack of thunder. The effect was instantaneous. The lead steer bolted and the rest followed, transforming the orderly drive into chaos. "Stampede," came the cry from somewhere ahead. Nora watched in horror as the cowboys tried to contain the panicked animals. The wagon horses reared, frightened by the thunder and the bellowing cattle. "Hold on," Old Joe cried, struggling with the reins through the curtain of rain. Nora saw Jack racing alongside the stampede, trying to turn the leaders. Another flash of lightning revealed the danger ahead, a steep ravine that hadn't been visible until they were nearly upon it, if the cattle went over. Jack saw it too. He spurred his horse forward, cutting in front of the lead steer, waving his hat and shouting. For a terrible moment, Nora thought the massive animal would run him down. Instead, it swerved and the herd began to turn, following in a great arc away from the ravine, but the ground was treacherous with mud. As Jack's horse made the sharp turn, its hooves slipped. Horse and rider went down hard at the edge of the ravine. "Jack!" Nora screamed, leaping from the wagon before old Joe could stop her. Rain lashed her face as she ran toward the spot where Jack had fallen. The herd had passed, the danger of being trampled gone, but a new fear gripped her heart. She skidded to a halt at the ravine's edge. Jack lay about 15 feet down, not at the bottom but on a small ledge. His horse had somehow scrambled back up and stood trembling nearby. Jack wasn't moving. "Jack," she called again, desperately searching for a way down. He stirred, groaning. "Stay back," he managed. "Edge isn't stable." But Nora had already found a path, a series of rocky outcroppings that formed a rough staircase. She descended carefully, slipping once but catching herself on a stunted pine that clung to the ravine wall. When she reached him, she saw blood matting his hair. "You're hurt. Just a knock to the head," he said, trying to sit up. He winced, his hand going to his left leg. "And maybe a broken bone or two." The rain was easing somewhat, but the ledge was narrow and growing slick with mud. Staying wasn't an option. "Can you stand?" Nora asked. "If you can put weight on your right leg, I can help you up." Jack looked at her, rain dripping from his hat brim. "You're something else, Nora Calloway." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite everything, warmth bloomed in her chest. With considerable effort and pain, they made their way up the ravine. 2 cowboys had found them by then and helped Jack the rest of the way. Together, they fashioned a crude travois to transport him the remaining distance to the ranch. Broken Spoke Ranch appeared through the rain like a mirage, a substantial 2-story house surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. It spoke of prosperity and permanence in a land where both were hard-won. The ranch owner, Gerald Sullivan, met them at the door. A barrel-chested man with a shock of white hair, he took one look at Jack and ordered him brought inside to the main house. "And who might this young lady be?" he asked as Nora followed. "Nora Calloway," Jack said through gritted teeth as the men carried him to a bedroom off the main hall. "She saved my life, Gerald, twice now." Sullivan raised an eyebrow but asked no more questions as a flurry of activity surrounded Jack. A ranch hand was sent to fetch the doctor from the nearest town, some 20 miles distant. In the meantime, Sullivan's housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, took charge of cleaning and bandaging Jack's head wound. "The leg will have to wait for Dr. Finch," she declared. "But I don't think he's bleeding inside. Eyes are clear and he's ornery as ever." Sullivan turned to Nora, who stood dripping in the hallway. "Mrs. Abernathy will show you to a room, Miss Calloway. Get yourself dry and warm, and then perhaps you can tell me how you came to be riding with my foreman." 2 hours later, dry and dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, Nora sat in Sullivan's study. She told him everything: her father's abuse, her escape, Jack's intervention, and the journey to the ranch. Sullivan listened without interruption, occasionally sipping from a glass of whiskey. "Jack Yates is the best foreman I've ever had," he said when she finished. "Not just with cattle, but with people. He's a good judge of character. If he saw something worth saving in you, then I'm inclined to trust his judgment." Nora flushed at his directness. "I don't want to impose on your hospitality, Mr. Sullivan. I can work." Sullivan waved a hand. "We can discuss that tomorrow. For tonight, you've earned your rest. The doctor has arrived for Jack, and Mrs. Abernathy has prepared a late supper for you in the kitchen." After eating her first proper meal in days, Nora checked on Jack. "Doctor." Finch, a thin man with spectacles and a surprisingly gentle manner, had set Jack's broken leg and given him laudanum for the pain. "He'll sleep through the night," the doctor told her. "The head wound isn't serious. Scalp injuries always bleed dramatically. The leg will need time to heal, though. 6 weeks at least before he can put weight on it." Jack's face in repose looked younger, the lines of responsibility temporarily erased by sleep. Nora resisted an unexpected urge to brush a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "You care for him," Mrs. Abernathy observed from the doorway. Nora started. He's been kind to me." The older woman's knowing smile said she understood more than Nora was ready to admit, even to herself. "Get some rest, child. Morning comes early on a ranch." Morning indeed came early, with roosters crowing and the sounds of a working ranch already in motion. Nora dressed in her now clean but still worn dress and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Abernathy was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with strong, capable hands. "Ah, there you are. Mr. Sullivan would like to see you after breakfast, and Jack's awake, asking for you." Nora's heart quickened. "I'll check on him first, if that's all right." Jack was propped up on pillows, his splinted leg extended before him, his expression one of frustrated immobility. "You look better," Nora said, entering the room, his face lightened at the sight of her. "And you look rested. Sullivan treating you well." "Very well," she confirmed, taking a seat in the chair beside his bed. "Though I haven't spoken with him yet this morning. Mrs. Abernathy says he wants to see me." Jack nodded. "He'll offer you a position here, probably in the house, helping Mrs. Abernathy." "How can you be sure?" "Because I asked him to," Jack said simply. "Before the laudanum took hold last night." Nora was touched by his concern for her welfare but also slightly irritated. "You don't think I could find my own way?" "I know you could," he said, surprising her. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Nora, but everyone needs help sometimes, even me." He gestured ruefully at his leg. She smiled, her irritation fading. "Yes, you're quite helpless at the moment. Completely at your mercy," he agreed with mock seriousness. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to change, becoming charged with something Nora had never experienced before, a pull, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Jack broke the moment, clearing his throat. "You should go see Sullivan. He's a good man, but he doesn't like to be kept waiting." Sullivan's offer was indeed a position as Mrs. Abernathy's assistant, with fair pay and a small room of her own in the main house. "Jack speaks highly of you," Sullivan said. "Says you have grit and good sense, two qualities I value above most others." "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, I accept gratefully." The older man nodded, then added, "I should warn you Jack Yates is not an easy man to know. He carries burdens from his past, as we all do, but his are heavier than most." "Old Joe mentioned he had troubles," Nora ventured. Sullivan studied her for a moment. "Jack was married once, some years back. His wife and infant son died in a house fire while he was away on a cattle drive. He couldn't save them, and that knowledge nearly destroyed him. He came west afterward, trying to outrun his grief." Nora's heart ached for him. "Thank you for telling me." "I'm telling you because I see how he looks at you like a man who's found water after years in the desert. Be careful with him, Miss Calloway, and with yourself." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to Nora's life. She rose early to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for the household, learned to manage the various domestic tasks required in a large ranch house, and gradually earned the older woman's approval and grudging affection. Each day she spent time with Jack as he recovered. At first, their conversations were general stories of the ranch, books they had read. Jack surprised her with his love of poetry, childhood memories that were safe to share. But as his leg healed and their trust in each other grew, they revealed more of themselves. "I was happy once," Nora told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jack had progressed to crutches, able to move about for short periods. "Before my mother died. She used to sing while she worked, and the whole house felt bright, even in winter." "What happened after she was gone?" Jack asked gently, Nora's hands twisted in her lap. "Pa started drinking. He'd always enjoyed his whiskey, but after Ma, it was different. Like he was trying to drown himself from the inside out. When he was sober, he was so sad I could hardly bear to look at him. When he was drunk, he was cruel." "Did he hit your mother too?" "No," Nora said. "Never. That's what makes it harder to understand." He loved her so much, and then he turned that love inside out for me, as if I was to blame for her dying. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Grief does strange things to people. Some turn it outward, some inward. Your father chose a coward's path, blaming others instead of facing his pain. Is that what you did? Nora asked carefully. Faced your pain, his eyes, reflecting the sunset's fire, turned to her. Sullivan told you. Yes, I'm sorry for your loss. Jack looked away again. I tried to outrun it at first. When that didn't work, I tried drowning it like your father. Then one night, drunk and ready to end it all, Gerald Sullivan found me in a saloon in Cheyenne. He'd lost his son in the war and recognized the look in my eyes. He offered me a job and a reason to keep going. And did it work, finding a purpose? It helped, Jack admitted. But the hole was still there, until recently. The way he looked at her then made Nora's breath catch. She had never been looked at that way before, as if she were precious and necessary. Jack, she began, not knowing what she meant to say. He saved her from having to find the words. It's getting chilly. We should go in. But something had changed between them. They both knew it, even if neither was ready to name it, as summer approached, bringing the promise of cattle drives and heightened activity on the ranch. Jack's leg finally healed completely. He discarded the crutches and resumed most of his duties as foreman, though Sullivan insisted he stay clear of breaking horses for a while longer. Nora had settled into ranch life completely. She had her own small garden plot where she grew herbs for the kitchen, had learned to make soap from misses. Abernathy, and had even begun to ride, taught by one of the younger cowboys under Jack's watchful eye. One warm evening, Jack found her in the garden harvesting mint for tea. Ride with me, he asked without preamble. She looked up, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Now. There's something I want to show you. Curious, Nora gathered her skirts and followed him to the stables. They rode out together, Jack leading the way into the foothills that rose behind the ranch. The air was sweet with sage and pine, the evening sky a palette of oranges and purples as the sun descended. They came to a small plateau overlooking the valley. Below them, the ranch buildings looked like toys, the grazing cattle mere dots on the vast landscape. Jack dismounted and helped Nora down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. It's beautiful, Nora said, turning slowly to take in the panoramic view. I come here to think, Jack said, standing close beside her, to remember what's important. And what is important, Jack Yates? She asked softly. He turned to face her fully. When Elizabeth and my son died, I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again. I was wrong. Being near you, watching you bloom here at the ranch, seeing your strength and kindness. It's woken something in me I thought was dead forever. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Jack, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that you've brought light back into my life, peace even, and I'm grateful. Impulsively, Nora reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. You gave me peace first. When you stood between me and my father, when you offered me a place with your crew, no one had ever defended me before. Jack caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. Nora Calloway, I think I've been falling in love with you since that first moment in town. I think perhaps I have too, she whispered. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Nora answered by stepping closer, her free hand coming to rest on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, like the man himself. When they parted, the first stars had appeared in the darkening sky. Jack kept her hand in his as they returned to the horses. What happens now? Nora asked. Jack smiled, and it transformed his face in a way she'd rarely seen. Now we see what kind of future we might build together, if you want that. I do, she said simply. Very much. Their courtship progressed through the summer with the blessing of Sullivan, who watched their growing bond with paternal satisfaction, and Mrs. Abernathy, who pretended exasperation but secretly began preparing a hope chest for Nora. In August, news reached the ranch that Ezekiel Calloway had been arrested for burning down his own farm in a drunken rage. No one was hurt, but he faced jail time for arson. Nora received the news with a complex mix of emotions: sadness for the broken man her father had become, relief that he couldn't harm her now, and guilt that she couldn't find it in herself to visit him. "You don't owe him your presence," Jack told her as they walked by the creek that ran through the ranch property. "You can forgive without subjecting yourself to more pain. Is that what you did? Forgive yourself for not being there when your family needed you." Jack was quiet for several paces. "I'm still working on that part," he admitted, "but loving you has helped me see that I deserve a second chance at happiness. We both do." They were married in September as the aspen trees turned gold on the hillsides. Sullivan gave the bride away, and old Joe, cleaned up and uncomfortable in a borrowed suit, stood as Jack's best man. The ceremony took place in the ranch house parlor, with the ranch hands and nearby settlers in attendance. Nora wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her make, with sprigs of lavender from her garden tucked into her upswept hair. When Jack saw her enter the room, the look on his face was one she would treasure forever: wonder and joy, and a love so palpable it seemed to fill the space between them. Sullivan's wedding gift was a plot of land adjacent to the ranch and lumber to build a house. "Not that I'm trying to be rid of you," he told them gruffly at the small reception afterward, "but a married couple needs their own home." That night, in the small cabin that had been prepared for them until their house could be built, Nora discovered the final piece of the peace she had been seeking. In Jack's tender embrace, the last shadows of her father's cruelty melted away, replaced by a love that asked nothing but offered everything. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered in the darkness later, her head resting on his chest. Jack's arms tightened around her. "Nor did I. But here we are, proving that sometimes life gives back what it has taken away." "And more," Nora added, thinking of all that had transpired since that desperate day she'd fled her father's belt. By the following spring, their house was completed, a sturdy two-story home with windows that caught the morning light and a wide porch for summer evenings. Jack continued as foreman of the broken spoke, while Nora divided her time between their home and helping Mrs. Abernathy, who was getting on in years and appreciated the assistance. When Nora discovered she was expecting their first child, due in the fall, Jack's joy was tempered with an old fear that Nora understood without words. "This child will be safe," she promised him as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "We both will." "I know," he said, and she could tell he was working to believe it. "This time will be different," and it was. Their son was born on a clear October day, a healthy, robust boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. They named him Thomas Gerald Yates, after Jack's father and the man who had given them both a second chance. As Jack held his son for the first time, the tears that streaked his face were those of healing, the final laying to rest of old ghosts, the embrace of a future once thought impossible. Standing in the doorway of their home a week later, watching Jack show their newborn the sunset from the porch, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From terror to tranquility, from her father's belt to her husband's arms, from a life of fear to one filled with love. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, noticing her gaze. Nora moved to join them, sliding her arm around his waist as they both looked down at their sleeping son. "I was thinking about peace," she said, "and how sometimes you have to run toward the unknown to find it." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm glad you ran in my direction." "So am I," Nora whispered, leaning into the strength and safety of his embrace. "So am I."